Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a Star Wars Legion podcast bringing you the latest news, general perspective, and competitive discussion.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels podcast. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Mike and Evan. What's up, gentlemen?
Hey.
Hey, ready to talk about a cool new interview.
That's right. There was a interview that AMG did with Gray Squadron Gaming, so if you want to see that in its entirety, we're just going to hit some highlights, but certainly you can go watch that or listen to it at Gray Squadron Gaming. So we're going to talk about that this week. We also have a handful of random recent tournament stuff from Evan. And we also have some announcements related to the Patreon and the website. So Evan, you want to hit those?
Yeah, you want to start with that?
Yeah, let's start with that.
All right, cool. So there's going to be more details on the blog itself and also on our Fifth Trooper Discord. But the very short version, and without getting into this full details now, is that we are looking at making some changes to our Patreon. We're going to be moving towards more like focusing more on engagement with the community directly. We want folks to really know exactly what the different tiers mean, and to have just a to have deliverables that we can be delivering on a more regular basis, and to just like have more interaction between us and the community. That's something that, as I've become a little bit more involved in the podcast side and also continuing to do the blog side, that's something that I've really been aiming towards, is that we have a lot of folks who read and listen, but I don't think that we're engaging as much as we could be with them. And so I want the Patreon tiers to be more closely aligned with that. So in terms of what that means exactly, like I said, just keep an eye out on the blog, and it'll also be in the Discord. As well as there'll be some more information about just ways that we're trying to broaden perspectives at Fifth Trooper. I'm gonna be getting into the details of a guest writing program we're starting up. We're starting to line up some potential guest podcast hosts in the next couple months, and that way, hopefully, when we go into 2025, we can be a Fifth Trooper that maybe more people can enjoy and that more people can interact with. So that's all for now. There'll be more to come soon.
Awesome. So keep an eye out for updates on that. I'd also like to tell you about our friends at Tabletop Terrain. They have miniature terrain for tabletop games. They have 3D printed scenery for war games, tabletop and role-playing games. It's handcrafted and available to ship to your door. They also offer board game organizers for quick setup and organization of your games. If you put in promo code TheFifthTrooper, all in caps, you can get 10% off. And that is at tabletopterrain.com. So go check them out. All right. Before we get to the interview, Evan, do you want to tell us about some recent games that you had?
Yeah, so luckily things lined up that I could go to 2 tournaments 2 weekends in a row.
Yeah,
which
buddy.
is unusual for me with my usual work schedule, but I just happened to have a couple weekends off in a row. And so I went to one down in Portland and then another one up near here in the Seattle area in Bellevue. I'm not going to do full battle report style because we got other stuff we got to get to, but I'll just summarize. But I'm sorry. There's other podcasts where you can get that stuff. I would be loath to name them because I don't want them to get any more attention. They already get maybe a little bit too much. Just kidding. I love you guys. Babcast.
I was gonna leave it at you know who you are, but
yeah, right. They do, and everyone
they
else
know.
does, I think.
Yeah, they know.
They know what they've done. But yeah, I took sort of a Rex version of the list that was terrorizing everybody before the Garner. So instead of Anakin Quad Strike, it was Rex Quad Strike. Because my theory was that list could still do well if you obviously you're losing a lot of offense and a Jedi when you lose Anakin, but that if you replaced that with Rex, is that at the very least via aggressive tactics and a couple of Rex's commands, is that you could bolster the rest of your army and make up for a little bit for the fact that at the top end you won't have as much going for you, obviously comparing Rex to Anakin. And long story short, that theory, it felt like it panned out. I got to play against all 5 quote unquote factions, including Shadow Collective twice actually. And it kind of panned out that way against the Red Safe factions. Like when I was played against Empire and I played against clones, and those games, I was able to just like pound a lot of hate via the quad strikes, like the quad strike teams for arcs, and then commandos, 2 squads of regular commandos shooting after that, and also air support. And I actually even had in one of my full arcs, I had sort of jammed another DC-15 in there. And so all that together, it piled on the nutrition on those Red Save armies, and that helped me win those games. Against Shadow Collective, I lost a really close game against Izzy. And that was, so I went 2-1 in that first tournament, and I was thinking, I think things may be going okay for this. Is that there were a couple of mistakes I made against Izzy. He's like very good player, obviously, and I was thinking maybe I should try this again. And then in that second tournament, that's where I started the day off by playing Shadow Collective again, doing better that time by sort of adjusting from my most recent time. And then I ran into a droid army. It was played by Adam Harrison. It was sort of like a beefy 14 act, lots of B1s, 3 decas. Also was double bounty, which was fun. That mostly ended up mattering because Bosk was able to lying in wait and just nearly obliterate Rex and forced me to just run away with Rex instead of doing Call Me Captain. But I would really notice then is that, all these plinky shots and from the strike teams is that they are completely meaningless against this army, or close to completely meaningless. And because my round 1 wasn't great, is that I started to fall behind when we had to get closer to each other. And then I ran into a different version of a problem against the my last opponent from all this, and his name was Ryan Myers. He was playing a rebel list with triple sleeper cell, and he had 3 ATRTs, and then he also had the X-34, which, as you know, credit to you two, because you were the ones who sort of opened my eyes to the fact that via the unstable astromech is that actually can also put out a lot of hate on turn 1. And so against that list, the problem was that with all the dodges and the armor, is that my strike teams were also doing basically nothing against that. And so in both those situations is that I found that because the alpha was not as good, is that not having Anakin to be there to be a mid-game guy and take care of business, just murdering people. Like Call Me Captain is great, but Rex himself can die pretty quickly. Doesn't have immune pierce or even impervious. Maybe that's something AMG can think about in the future. But in any case, I think that it's sort of demonstrated to me that I'm not sure how great the arc strike teams are at this point, just because of the fact that there's a lot of many armies out there, and also a lot of dodge spam and armor. It just seems like that's been picking up more and more as the months have gone on, and it's probably going to get worse. And especially with aqua droids, like once I saw aqua droids, I think I knew that this list was sort of headed to the graveyard anyway. I just didn't think that it would be this fast. So I think that right now, there's certainly more than one archetype for Republic. Is that we saw that multi-armor army that got 5th at PAX, and I think that Wookiees can still also do pretty good. But other than that, is that I think you're probably best off sticking with either Anakin or Obi-Wan, and then just using a combination of full arcs, commandos, and infantry to uh, just beef it out. Try to make sure that there's no surge tokens getting in there, and that's sort of the way the Republic meta is, which means that in order to maybe take a little bit of a break, I think I'm gonna be trying out a different army for a month or two because I think that I've played that army of just like Jedi plus clones so many times is that I want to try something a little bit different. I haven't really fully decided yet. I may try to find an item list that I like, but in any case, I'm probably going to be taking a Republic break until ARF Troopers come out, which will hopefully be before Worlds, and then that'll determine whether I want to uh, run back with open arms. But that's the long and short of it. So taught me some things about where Republic is, but also yeah, if you have a list that is not going to have dice pools that can get through either armor or dodge or hopefully both, then you're going to have some problems in this game.
Which version of that list did you end up playing?
Yeah, I played the one without fives, and
Oh,
just
my man, you hurting me. You hurt my
yeah,
soul.
I know. I kept looking at the price tag on fives, and it just it kept sort of like convincing me that
Ah.
I'm like spending too much cash on one guy.
In
I very well
in
could have been wrong.
in today's 1,000 point economy, five is basically
That's
free.
fair. I think that my vision of things is still in the 800 point zone, but it's starting to change. And like there are some units like I mean I don't know when you think about the fact that the cost of fives is like slightly less than a Droideka, uh, I don't know. It starts to feel bad all over again.
Well, I mean, in fairness to fives,
Yeah,
I think Droidekas are likely in the bracket of units that are presently undercosted. I don't know by how much, but probably by like 5 to 10 points. Um, I think people just like aren't playing them because people are still in a similar mindset where they're like, it's a 100 point Legion, therefore Droidekas are bad, you
I
know.
I think more people are playing them and they are reaping rewards by doing that because and you know their suppressive weapon matters more than it did before. So even if they're not like doing a ton of damage, which they're not because they still don't surge, but um,
Well, I actually for a 60 point unit, they do like a pretty decent amount of damage with
that's
2 red,
fair
4 black.
60 for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, like for the 60, I mean, I don't know.
And your surge token access has improved a lot with Exemplar, and I mean if you're running
true.
like a super tack with aggressive tactics, that's pretty good surge access for your
Yeah,
Droidicas. So
And they've also like reaped the shields is one of the one things. I mean, cover didn't change how shields worked,
yeah, that's right.
so like they're one of the only units that still has its defensive tack and like in intact after this update. So I don't know.
And I mean, believe me, I'm looking at a triple deca double aqua list as the first like sys list for me to dive into because that I think it's 310 points for 5 activations.
Oh, it's so cheap.
That
It's a
all of
lot
which
of it's
all
a
of which
lot of
block line of
wounds.
sight.
It's a
yeah,
lot of
exactly,
wounds.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so when you've gotten up to 5 with like actually beefy units, like way beefier than your standard B1 unit, then you start to look at sort of like the fully kitted Dooku is 240 points with burst and choke and push.
Hmm.
And then, you know, maybe you could have a command on him too, either aggro attack or improvised. Like both of those have potentially a place depending on your army. But that looks a lot more attractive when you've already gotten like 5 beefy activations out of the way by spending 300. And
Yeah.
then after all that, you have like you're going to have your requisite, you know, 114 points of B1s. and then you can do whatever you want after that, which will,
Yeah, you've still got like 350
yeah,
points left over to play
exactly.
with that
It's kind of
juncture.
crazy.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I bought an army and still have like a third of my points left.
Yeah.
Like, great.
So either Empire or Sis is the next direction for me to go while I wait for ARF Troopers to kind of give me something a little bit new, hopefully.
I do have a question for you in regards to the games that you played.
Yeah.
You said you played Shadow Collective twice. Based on your conclusions, I am making the assumption that both of those Shadow Collective lists were at least built around the foundation of Pikes.
Actually, no. One of them was built around the like the one that Izzy played was had one whip and also one Black Sun.
Okay.
And then he used two buses that actually had no weapon, but they were there to be medics for the unit that I would say both like so both of those lists were centered around the combination of Maul and three super commandos. One of them
Okay.
had Gar Saxon, the other one Izzy's did not. He basically had like a bus and a couple extra generic commanders instead of Gar Saxon, and more activations that way for Maul. And yeah, like those super commandos, especially when they're getting medicked up, is that they last a long time, and neither of them even had shields on them. To be honest, is that using recon intel instead in order to like get that rocket shot off in the way that you would want to on turn one. I feel like that's actually more valuable. And then once you're forward enough, is that with the speed 3 move and the range 3 attack that they have, which is another important reason of why they're so much more viable in my opinion than the rebel ones, is that they have a big range 3 attack. Is that like they're mean. And I think that all of us, even in the beginning, were like, I think that the direction for Shadow Collective to go, maybe the best one, is sort of focused around super commandos, and that like by relatively minimizing the importance of either Pikes or Black Suns, is that you can have a unit that is like more flexible than either one of those is. Um, so yeah, like I think that even though like we'll get to the stuff about the future of the faction in terms of releases in just a second here, is that as of
I'm
right
sorry.
now,
I need to change your nomenclature.
yeah,
The Battle
sorry, the Battle
Force.
Force, yeah, yeah, you know, it's well, you can be a quote unquote professional like Legion blogger and podcaster and still just like get it wrong sometimes. And I'm embarrassed, and I'll understand if that statement that I just made, that misstep, will mean that you're not going to be interested in those new Patreon tiers at all. So I get it. Yeah. So that Battle Force is that even though releases may be a question mark for them, is that as far as competitiveness goes now, I think that they're a-okay. I think that there are lists there that they can win with, and if people want to look at those tournaments, I'll try and double check ourselves that we can get a link to the Longshanks for at least one of them in the show notes or YouTube. Is that you can see what Izzy was playing because he went 3-0 in both those tournaments. It's an Izzy list, and he will do things that people usually wouldn't think of, and so they may seem like head scratchers, but he's certainly found a way for it to work. And I think that there's a variety of ways to make it work, but they should probably, in my opinion, all have at least a couple units of super commandos in there, just because they can fill so many different roles at once, and they're beefy, and you can medic them up with a bus every single turn.
No, I dig that. I definitely think Super Commandos are much better than they used to be at a bare minimum.
Yeah, I faced some super commandos at Nova with the old B2 PK spam list, and he killed more B2s than any other opponent that I faced.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's definitely something there. All right, should we talk about the highlights of this interview?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right, what do you guys think? I haven't personally seen it, so tell me, hit me with some tidbits. from the interview?
Where should we start, Evan?
Well, it's tough because like they touched on a variety of topics, and that like Gray Squadron did a good job of mixing up the questions and keeping things moving so that they really did get to talk about a variety of things. I think that there's one thing that they told us that's sort of more in the spoiler territory, and we should probably save that for last.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I think that maybe the first thing to mention is relevant to uh, the Shadow Collective stuff that we just talked about, and we can sort of talk about how it relates to the idea of releases in general. Is that there was a question, which is a common one that we hear about whether there are more releases on the way for Shadow Collective, and they made it a point to kind of remind us about the fact that that Shadow Collective is a battle force and not a faction, and they got into points about how if you think about like if they got into the zone about thinking about mercenaries as if it was a single cohesive faction of just like people and things that didn't belong in the other factions, is that what you can end up with is having this big pool of neutral characters that is actually like overly stuffed because they're not following the same sort of rules. And so I think that in saying that, they were sort of making their argument against like mercenaries being a faction in and of itself, and talking about why they instead are focusing on uh, as units come out to where it would make sense, is that to keep mercenary factions to be like focused on a certain portion of the Star Wars universe. So that's why right now they have Shadow Collective, which is weirdly enough based on only 3 episodes of the Clone Wars. That's like, I think that's all it was. Maybe it was 4. But
Yeah.
it's not as much as people think in terms of like what the full background of Shadow Collective is, and then Ewoks, which has sort of more of a, even though that was only one movie, is that in a weird way it sort of became a bigger like thing, and
There
with
was a
more
Christmas special
variety.
somewhere
Yeah,
in there.
that's right. And there were those 2 movies that we don't really like talking about, um, but they mentioned about how people who play those armies shouldn't expect that there's going to be a ton of expansions for them. Is that whereas if you're thinking about the core 4 factions, is that you realistically should expect that you are going to be getting a regular-ish pace of expansions that sort of will over time touch on each one of the ranks and sort of cycle in and out, and so that, yeah, if you're playing those 4 factions, is that you can expect that stuff, but that if if you're talking about Shadow Collective or Ewoks, is that they are limited by what's in the canon for those things, and they're like LFL. Even if AMG did want to stray from that, is that they didn't say this, but I'm sure that Lucasfilm would not let them because they hold that stuff very close to the chest, and so um, in saying that, is like we can sort of drift on to the related news item, is that they talked about the concept of Ewok gliders and catapults very specifically in a way that made me pretty darn suspicious that those are in the development pipeline,
I
like
mean,
officially.
they went as far as being like, there is a support slot in the Ewok battle force, and there
Yeah,
is presently nothing to fill it,
right.
which, so maybe it does feel weird to me that it didn't get released with the main Ewok thrust of like,
I'm
you know,
guessing they just didn't have the factory
y- y-
slots. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's probably a logistics thing as
yeah.
opposed to but definitely, I mean, that was good to hear. I definitely thought Ewoks were just done as far as releases go.
Yeah, I did know, I knew about that support slot thing because it's the same as the operative slot in 501st, is that
Sure.
all of us have known that that's Ahsoka for forever, and that they're just sort of like keeping the seat warm. Um, and so gliders was the thing that made sense. I thought the idea of catapults was interesting, is that I was sort of wondering, would it be like a cheap heavy that they could take instead of Chewbacca? The fun thing that I thought of would be like, what if it was like 5 white dice but Pierce 3 with no surging? Because
That
like it's hard
sounds
to hit
on
something with a
theme.
rock.
Yep.
But if you do get hit with a rock, it would probably hurt a lot. I
Yep.
mean, that's sort of like Wicket's ranged weapon, right?
Yeah,
Which
yeah.
I've always actually loved that about Wicket's design is the 1 black dice with sharpshooter 2 and Pierce 1.
Yeah. It is fun to use for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So, but that even though they mentioned those things specifically about Ewoks, is that when they were going back to talking about Shadow Collective specifically, they were talking about that they basically said that they're bouncing around ideas, and so if there is stuff in the pipeline for Shadow Collective, either A, they didn't want to talk about it, or B, there's not actually anything that is solidified yet. And so what I took away from that is that I wouldn't expect Shadow Collective specific releases in at least the next year or so.
Yeah, I think what I heard from that conversation was, hey, if you get a Shadow Collective unit, it's not because we made it for Shadow Collective, it's because we made it for another battle force. Like they specifically mentioned like Jabba's goons and stuff.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and that unit could potentially also fit under the Shadow Collective umbrella, so they'll kind of slide it into the battle force. It didn't sound like they were intentionally going to go out of their way to make Shadow Collective units just for the Shadow Collective battle force.
Yeah, and so I think that if the Shadow Collective players are lucky, is that they may be planning like more expansions around the Boba Fett show. Fingers crossed for the Vespa gang. But
Speed 1 speeder.
yeah,
The game's first Speed 1 speeder.
Speed 1 speeder, and yeah, maybe what was the maybe give them speeder and plotting. To sort of reinforce the the fact that that scene was just hilariously slow when you watch that show.
Yeah.
It was like that scene in Seinfeld with the like electric wheelchair chase with
Yeah,
Costanza.
exactly. That's
Yeah.
what it felt like.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, Robert Rodriguez, what happened? Anyway, is that like maybe if they did that, then Fennec Shand, I think, would have been old enough to maybe have done some Shadow Collective business. But and then there's like Savager Press is the more obvious one that
Yes.
they could make at some point. Like they did actually sort of talk about the idea of a Dathomir expansion, which made me wonder if they're going to be doing some stuff around the Night Sisters, and then that would be a great opportunity to release Savager Press, which you could have either in the Dathomir Battle Force or in Shadow Collective. So there's hope for the future, but there's nothing specifically mentioned yet. And then sort of like talking about releases also is that one of the other big points that they made was that somebody asked about whether we could expect reprints anytime soon, because as we talked about, I think a couple episodes ago, is that there's some units such as some strong units such as B2s and Republic Commandos that are very, very hard to find in store shelves, and that certainly Asmodee themselves have sold through them. And they what the AMG does mention was that like from this point forward, anything that's being made is going to be made with their new packaging dynamics that includes both what the package looks like and also what's inside of it, being that unit cards and upgrades are going to be multilingual, which means that I think that there aren't going to be any more Legion boxes coming from Asmodee that look like the old Legion boxes, and so like Riot Control and Sleeper Cell were not only like the last new expansions that we got shipped over, but I think that they're going to be the last expansions period with the old packaging, which means that it's sort of going to be a jumble in terms of when we're going to get things like B2s and Republic Commandos back on store shelves, because they can't just reprint the old stuff. Is that they're going to be printing with the new stuff, with the new card art and multilingual, everything like that. And They did say that they were going to focus on things that sold through first, but that also means that we may be looking at a timeline of many months to maybe a year, or maybe even a little bit over a year, to get those products back on shelves.
Which means that if you can find any of those products
Get 'em
anywhere,
now.
you should scoop them up. Because that problem is not going to get fixed. The TLDR of that, I feel like, is that problem's not going away, and we're just going to have to deal with it in the interim.
I think so.
Yeah.
And maybe at Adepticon they'll tell us more about reprint order, because there are, like some units are getting like the soft plastic upgrade, but to hard plastic, I should say. But then 4 units like the B2, like Commandos, Commandos just came out like 6 months ago. So it's kind of crazy to think about.
No. It's got to be. Is it really only 6 months? There's no way.
Like maybe 7. Wasn't it May?
It was one of the last units before 2.6.
Yeah.
It feels like it's been a year.
It definitely has not.
It was
been a
after
year.
Worlds.
Yeah.
That's what I can say for sure.
Yeah, that's fair. It definitely was after Worlds. Okay.
Yeah. Bad
But
Batch and Commandos were.
This is like 9 months ago. Okay. Yeah, maybe 7.
And so yeah, like it sucks that it especially sucks for B2s, right? Because that's like literally the other choice. Or sorry, there's Genosians. So it's one of the 3 choices for the faction for a unit that you're required to have.
Core units being unavailable, to me, is, I don't want to use the word unacceptable, but I think I'm gonna, because that's sort of like the bread and, like, you can't play the game without core units. Like, you can't. So
if you're like a new player wanting to get into the game and you want to play Separatists, it's a challenge for you if B2s are not available. So,
and it's rough from a thematic standpoint also, right? Because like they were obviously in the movies, but then they heavily featured in Clone Wars show. They even showed up as like the reason why the Mandalorian hates droids is because a bunch of B2s were out there just like smoking everybody when he was a kid. And so, this is like a thing that's shown up everywhere, and that people obviously like it. And it's powerful in the game. And so, yeah, I just hate it for newer players that they can't get them easily.
Yeah, I mean, I've only got 2 squads of them right now. I definitely would like to get my hands on more, to be honest. But alas, here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was one of the lucky ones that, or degenerate, depending on how you want to look at it, that bought a bunch of them when they first came out, so I could run like mall B2s when that was the thing.
Yeah.
And it was awesome when it was a thing.
It was okay.
I'm not gonna like label people, but I'd say it was more degenerate than lucky. I'm glad you got them, Kyle.
Yeah. All right. Anyway.
So and then next is that this is sort of like, it's brief to talk about, but it's another interesting one, is that they talked about how future primary objectives will add some more variety, and so it is possible that we may get something that's more along the lines of recover the supplies than the current ones. But the thing that they were resolute on, which I thought was an interesting thing for them to focus on, was that they're definitely not going to be doing any objectives to where players are going to be in charge of choosing the location of objectives. And so like thinking back, is that mattered for quite a few of them, right? Is that it sort of mattered for hostage. There was more about player choice about what you're using as your carrier, but it definitely mattered for supplies. It mattered for evaporators. It mattered for payload. And it mattered for key positions. And so like that sort of a player choice element, it was like very commonly an important part of the game. And for what it's worth, they've said that like that's the thing that they're definitely going to stay away from, which, I think that you can make arguments one way or another. I think that if they can find ways, I personally think that if they can find ways to at least sort of make the nature of what you're doing something that's a little bit different from standing on points, is that they will be able to add more variety to the game. But I can also see folks that think that it's too bad that that level of player agency is not going to be back anymore. Like their reasoning was that they didn't want games to be over before they started, which to be fair is that if you made very poor choices with your evaporators or your boxes, then a game could basically be over before it started in the past. And they wanted to keep things a little bit more regulated as far as that goes.
So I got a hill I'm gonna get up on top of and die on
Hey,
right
hey,
now.
sure, man. That's your
Um,
right. You have a podcast.
I have a couple things to say about this. The first is, if this is the direction they want to take, fine. However, I would make the argument that they have already contradicted this statement in that destroy enemy base is placeable. And
Ah, you're right.
like they have already done that. So this thing that they are purportedly like endeavoring not to do was in the first set of basic releases.
That is
So
for a secondary, and it's
it
also one of the least valuable secondaries.
depending on how you look at it,
Yeah.
destroy enemy base is like game changing if you're able to score it,
Oh yeah, it
right?
can be a big jump.
Like if you score it and your opponent does not, the game is
Yeah.
just over. In much the same way that if like you misplaced a box on recover the supplies, the game would be just over,
Hmm.
right? So the fact that the designers are like preaching that principle bothers me just from a you've already contradicted yourself standpoint, but also like people placing the objectives was never the problem. The problem was people misunderstanding the game state once those objectives were placed, and not understanding the situation they were in, which is like learning how to play the game. That's like a learning how to play and like becoming experienced problem, not a the game is fundamentally not working problem. Um, you can definitely say I don't know. There's like a disconnect between those two things. If you think that that's a problem and you shouldn't be doing it, you shouldn't be teching it into your game at all, but they've already done that. So I just don't understand. I don't know. It bothers me.
I also think the whole like game over before it started thing is always been a little bit overblown. You
It's
know,
been
I mean,
hyperbolic, and I think we've been. I personally have definitely been hyperbolic about it in the past. Like it's definitely games that were more winnable than I think I even gave them credit for in the past.
yeah, I mean, I think it was like a most of the time, if you made some egregious turn zero mistake, it was like, oh, I turned this from a 50-50 to like a 60-40 or something
Yeah.
to that effect. Not like a 95-5. Um, so
Hemmed in payload was always over before it started, but that
I
was the
think
only
that's the
true
one.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah,
There were
because that's
definitely,
just a math
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah. You just got screwed either way in that
Yeah.
situation.
but
Um,
you could always ban out of that. Like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that was
that's
like
true.
you
Yes.
you particularly with the four card flip, like that could never actually happen to you if you could avoid it.
Right. That's fair.
If you knew that you should avoid that, then there was zero chance of it happening to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. And that's true of skew objectives generally,
Yeah.
you know, under the old rules. But yeah, I do think that's always been a little bit overblown. I don't know. I'm a little sad by this because I've always felt that placing objectives adds more variety to games. It adds a dimension where you're considering terrain more. You know, I remember
Hmm.
going back and like looking at tables and scouting tables and being like, all right, if I get this deployment, that's a good VAP spot. You know,
Yeah.
if I get recon, this is the angle that I'm gonna approach it from, and this is where I'm gonna like, you know, now I just show up to a table and I'm like, all right, this is a table. Let's see what happens, you know. Uh, and I feel like that takes away a lot of um, you know, the fun in trying to like solve a puzzle. Um, but you know, it is what it is. I mean, they've been pretty clear on this, so this is what we have now. But like you said, Mike, you know, they also have something already where you're placing it. So I mean, maybe we won't get primaries where you're placing them, but maybe we'll get some secondaries still where you can put stuff on the table. I don't know. I'd like to see it. I feel like it causes you to interact with the terrain more.
I think the issue that I have, particularly with their discussion around this and destroy enemy base specifically, is that in the way that secondaries interact with the game is that if you want to actually win the game, you have to score a secondary. Like it's not really optional if you want to win decisively. Um, and because of that, that means you have to score the secondary. If you're playing destroy enemy base, then the game kind of becomes all about it to some degree. And unless neither of you can score it. But chances are if you have destroy enemy base in your deck, you have a plan.
I think you can win with close the pocket without worrying about secondaries, but
That's fair. That's fair.
maybe the one situation because you're by definition you're dominating like 3/4 of the points if you score the middle on one side. But
Yes.
that's the only one, honestly.
I would say if you're playing close the pocket, you probably don't have destroy enemy base in your deck.
No, yeah, you're probably more of a sit there and share tokens sort of army.
I mean, yeah.
Not that I'm naming names again.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody does that now, Evan.
Oh, right.
Well, I think destroy enemy base really prefers you to be spread out. You're trying to spread your opponent across the battlefield so they can't protect their base, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
You play that if you have speeders or fast things.
Yeah, or you've got Bad Batch and they're
Yeah.
like really good at, doing the thing.
Right.
And I don't know. We'll see. It's interesting to hear them have this conversation and immediately like the first thing they did already is kind of contradictory to it.
For what it's worth is that like there are other secondaries that involve player agency by definition. Is that it's true that like bring them to heal, you can argue about whether there's like a lot of player agency in that. You're mostly shooting guys, and then the one where you have to, I always forget the name of this one, where you have to shoot one from each area or like kill a guy in each area of the map. Like those two are pretty generic, but when you think about the other ones about recon mission, surface scan, enemy base, and even mark targets, even though it's not like super exciting, is that all of those do involve like making choices, and that you can like that is an area to where players can kind of mess up. Is that you can put your base in a bad place, or you could make your mark target like maybe the thing that's most likely to die instead of the thing that's least likely to die, or if you if you like give your recon mission to, or if you give your surface scanners to guys that would actually rather hang back and stay in your own territory for the rest of the game, then you're going to be messing yourself up there. So at least for the secondaries, there's more agency, and that's why like when I read that article a few weeks ago, I argued that I would like for the secondaries to basically count as much as the primaries because I think that they add more variety to the game.
Yeah.
And so maybe that will still be possible. I think that all of us in this cast have generally thought that we have like that we have more appreciation for the secondary mission design just generally than the primary design because there's more variety and there's more agency. So at least if they keep with that, then half of the stuff will have choice involved.
Yeah, though I would like to point out that all of the stuff that you just pointed out in the secondaries, you can lose the game almost as instantaneously as if you placed a bad recover box or a bad evaporator if you select the wrong units on recon or surface scan or mark targets.
Or deploy them in a poor way.
Or deploy them poorly, right? Like
if you have a surface scanner that's way too exposed, and then your opponent's just gonna scan your dead guy scanners, that's bad.
Yeah,
that's a 3-point swing when that happens.
Oh, the game's over at that point. Generally, 90% of the time.
Yeah. I also don't think it's inherently bad for that to be like a thing.
I don't think so either. I'm just saying that if the design choices you're gonna make are, we don't want people to like be instantaneously dead on turn one after making a poor decision, their design of the game does not reflect that.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah, I don't think clearly that's something they're trying to avoid and maybe not succeeding. But I also don't know that like that's something that you really need to try to avoid.
I mean, that's why games should require some amount of skill.
Yeah, I mean, I'm teaching my daughter chess, my 8-year-old daughter. She's super into it. you know, one of our first games, I did the like whole beater and four moves thing because
Yeah,
she
the
wasn't
4-move checkmate.
yeah, because she
Yeah.
wasn't protecting her king's pawn. And you know what? She only made that mistake one time.
Yep.
So she made it the first time, and that's the only time she's made that mistake. So, um, you know, things like that exist in games of skill and competition, and that's fine, in my opinion. But anyway, yeah, if my 8-year-old can learn that lesson, then
I'm
grown adults playing Star Wars miniatures games can learn lessons like that.
I'm just wondering if she told the tale to her friends at school about how her dad just like ruthlessly, relentlessly got a checkmate in 4 moves.
Hey, you know, I mean, it's the best way to teach. I think I'd be doing a disservice to her if I went easy on her. So, and
That's
I've
fair.
treated that, yeah, I do the same thing with other games. She's beaten me at memory. That game where you flip
Yeah,
the
the
thing over.
cards.
We go like 50-50 on that at this point, and that's a game that I've been very good at for a
That's
long
that's
time.
that's only going to get worse with time, Kyle.
I
I'll just
know.
tell
Yes,
you.
I'm aware. I'm very aware
We're
right
all
now.
losing the game of memory from the age of 30 onwards.
Yep. Yeah, I feel that every day.
Yeah.
I'll walk into a room and I'll be like,
Well,
why am
why
I
am I here?
here?
Yeah.
Yep. Great.
Yep. All right.
Anyway, so another like this is a super quick one is that there was some banter back and forth that to me and Mike anyway made it pretty clear that they're going to be showing off the new core set at Adepticon. I think a lot of people probably assumed that, but it seems like it would be now really, really, really surprising if they did not. And the word core set was used by one of the wills at one point when they were sort of talking about ways that players can get into the game now. They failed to mention the Legion Buyer's Guide that's at thefifthtrooper.com/blog. But I'll forgive them for that this time. But in saying that is that like one of them said if you don't want to wait for the new core set, then blah 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 blah. Which you know at least it tells me that there is one coming and that we're probably going to see what it's like. We don't know whether it's going to be dual faction or single faction. I'm guessing single faction because if they're following the example of other minis games as they've done somewhat already, then it's probably going to be single faction. But
I
yeah, we'll see.
I would have to go back and rewatch the interview, and maybe this is just my brain being optimistic, but I could have sworn that they used core sets like plural.
Well, even if it was dual faction, it would be two of them, right? But I guess
Not
we don't.
necessarily.
That's
Well, for 4 factions.
You're assuming that every faction is going to get a core set.
Yeah, that's fair. That is an assumption, but it's probably a pretty educated one, right? It's the like, if they left something out, I think that there it would be like a distraction that they really wouldn't want, and also I think that it would hurt their sales. On
Maybe I
top
would
of
just
that,
point to GW, who they're clearly kind of like modeling their franchise around presently,
hmm
who their core sets every 6 years or 3 years or whatever it is. They don't do they just pick two factions and go, you
mm.
know.
but they also have like 30,
Yes,
whereas
no doubt the
Yeah,
scale is definitely
versus
different
4,
there.
yeah.
But I just
But
I
they
don't
do
know.
have multi-mini boxes for most of the factions, right? Even if it's not technically a core set. Like
Yes,
akin to the Battle Force boxes that we got a
m-
couple years ago.
yes.
most of the quote unquote major
Yeah,
factions anyway. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Um, they did not talk about the going to your local hardware store to pick up like
yeah.
tools and
It's
stuff,
too
which I
bad.
thought was really disappointing.
Yeah, but again, that's why they could have just redirected to our blog, and then they could have kept their answer like 10 seconds. But
There you go.
oh well, they can know that for next time.
Yeah.
And then was there anything else aside from Jin before we hit that very last one?
Um, I don't think so. I guess I would say that I feel like they've done this in the past couple interviews, but I feel like Gungans have been thrown around a lot and they seemed to be very specific about them. I think, they weren't specific in any way, shape, or form, but I would be very surprised if the next like Geonosian release was not Gungans.
It's gonna be them. Like they were down to the point of like talking about the scale of like the shield generator dinosaurs that they have compared to
Yeah.
the rest of the army, which makes me think that at the very least they've been sort of rewatching that scene or looking at like the official heights of stuff on Wikipedia. Uh, and so I don't know. It's been a foregone conclusion. It's one that I've been like sort of dreading for like 3 years now.
Dreading.
But
Oh man, I'm gonna play the
I know. I'm
crap out of the
like I'm
Gungan
one of very
army.
few who is like not excited about a republic. It would be like a republic-ish mercenary force. I assume the same way that Bright Tree is a rebel-ish mercenary force. But
Maybe because
it
I think you would probably have to consider them being used like on Moncal and stuff too.
yeah, that's true.
And
That's
the
true.
fact that they're releasing like the Aqua droids and stuff right now suggests to me that they're probably coming sooner rather than later. I would be surprised if we didn't see Gungan sculpts at Adepticon, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them. I feel like I'm 50-50 on it, but I have a while before I have to make my predictions post for Adepticon 25.
Closer than you
Yeah,
think.
yeah, it really is.
Yeah, what, 3.5 months, basically? 4 months. It's 4 months away.
Yeah, 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tickets will go on sale, I think, in exactly a month. So definitely line up for that if you want your goodie bag or whatever, or if you want to like make sure you get it into Worlds, is that'll be a date to keep in mind. We'll have another cast before that though, so we can remind people about it. But yeah, the last thing they got into was that there was one unit that I think you can, even though we've all sort of gone we've talked about Yoda a lot as far as being the most affected by the change, and I'm sorry that I don't have time to like lay down all the trash on the Indianapolis crew for a little fake fight that started on Discord about their opinions about Yoda.
I'm
But,
sorry. Did they try and say he's good?
we don't have the time, Mike. I may or may not be working on lining up a member of their crew to come on our show in a future episode, and then we can gang up on them.
Roast.
So yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I do feel like
Something to look forward to.
I do feel like I have like a lot of credit in this category specifically, so I'm ready for the fight.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, if anybody's a Yoda player, it's you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that even we would make the argument that the unit that was like is under the biggest pile of dust after that change, even because she was like halfway under it already before the change, is Jyn Erso, who's like, not only was her 3 pips sort of like largely weakened by the changes of 2.6 generally, but at least she could like run around beating people with the stun baton that were ganging up around a POI before, and now she can't do that because her charge is worthless outside of her activation. And so I think in order to sort of assuage the sadness of Jyn Erso fans everywhere, is that they did like get into pretty hefty spoiler territory talking about what the new Jyn Erso is going to be. They said that it's they think it is the most like top bottom rework of any of the reworks that they did for this update, and like they were basically suggesting that her rework is going to be even like more hefty than what they were doing for Lando and Callus, which like theirs may be more focused around their command cards and a couple other keywords, but for her it sounds like all of her command cards and all of her keywords and her weapon profile are also going to be changing. They described her. They didn't talk about like weapon profile specifically, but they described her as an annoying melee unit, but like more focused on that than their previous unit was. New command cards, and then they did talk about some specific keywords that at the very least, the most updated playtest version has. Like Will Pagani pulled up the PDF as they were talking so that he could make sure he didn't misremember anything, but he mentioned nimble still. That's sort of the old one, but agile on top of that. And then the really spicy things, in my opinion, are disengage and independent move, which would be a new one and a really powerful independent like keyword to give somebody. And then to cap it all off is that they mentioned that she is going to be an operative and not a commander anymore, which will probably go along with some other rumored changes that we've heard about, like what the commander and operative slots are going to mean. I think many of us think that it's going to be like everybody's going to do what Shadow Collective does, to where you have 4 slots for them. And then as long as you have 1 commander, you can do either 3 more commanders or 3 more operatives to whatever your fancy is. But yeah, so she's gonna be an operative. All those other changes, those are really good keywords for staying alive. I can tell you that.
Yeah. Well, and they're really good together, right? Like your
Yeah.
independent move
Yeah,
triggers
they all work
agile,
together. Yep.
which sets up nimble. You know, if you're in melee, you can do that independent move with disengage.
And so she
so
functionally has the old vigilance permadodge without the need for vigilance that way.
right. Yeah. I mean, it's hard without seeing like her offensive profile,
Yeah.
because her problem really currently is not that she's like too squishy or doesn't have it's that she doesn't have a presence because she's a wet noodle, basically. So you're just kind of like, okay, Jin's there. She's moving around, whacking dudes or throwing 2 dice at dudes. Okay, sure. Let you know. But I guess we'll see. The fact that they're making her an operative, I actually find a little disappointing, because one of the most relevant things about the current version of Jin is that she's a Courage 3 commander in a faction that doesn't have a lot of access to Courage 3 commanders.
That will make a Luke Skywalker a bust at this point if nothing changes for Courage 3 commanders.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I think that I don't know. I'm hoping this is not the extent of the keyword she has access to. Changing her to an operative and not giving her secret mission feels like a really big flavor foul to me.
I mean, she might still have it. It's possible this is not like a complete.
I should say that they also did mention that she's keeping infiltrate. I should mention that as well. So she'll certainly be able to like deploy where she needs to go, but rather than being secret mission, it seems like her job is going to be sort of a hornet buzzing around a POI and causing trouble and being very hard to kill.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. I don't know. I think independent move is interesting, but I'm not sure how good that's actually going to be without, I think, seeing it play out. I feel like doing anything but like peekabooing with it is probably going to be not super great, because that means she doesn't have an order. And if she's like independent moving to like disengage out of melee, she's just going to immediately die.
I feel like a lot. I mean, it seems like everything centers around what her weapon profile is. So I'm sure that we'll see that at AdeptCon, or I'm guessing we will.
Well, I guess I'd like to pose a whole nother question. Is she like, assuming that she's still 6 health and white armor saves?
Yeah.
Is she even remotely like, let's assume she gets a lightsaber. Is she even viable at that point in a setting where people are running around with like 10 to 14 die melee attack pools?
If she still has danger sense, I think probably.
Yeah, they didn't mention that.
But yeah, if she's basically just like Leia or Padme in melee, then yeah, right. She's gonna die
She's gonna die instantly.
Right.
I don't know. Just an interesting but I guess obviously we don't have the full picture, but I'm just like kind of looking at this like, I mean, Jin was never really a melee brawler even in the previous edition.
But this is the thing though, is like, what if it's all those changes and she's also 65 points? Right? Is like then she'll
be more like Wicket. Probably.
Yeah. That would be more reasonable.
Yeah.
Tough to
if
say,
she's
I
just
guess.
like Wicket Part 2, I think that'd probably be a little boring, but she would also be pretty effective.
Yeah.
So
lots of variables.
Jin and Wicket combo coming to a store near you.
Yep. BFFs, Jin and
Yeah.
Wicket. You thought it was Leia and Wicket,
Yeah.
but no,
This
it's
is
Jin and
just like the
Wicket.
movies.
That's right, just like the movies.
Uh,
All right. Well, anything else? Any final thoughts on that?
no, it'll be good to get the rest of the this edition in the next update. So looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, there'll be a lot at Adepticon. They keep talking about 2025 being sort of the year of Legion, whereas this year was sort of like the year of Shatterpoint as far as releases go. So we will see what they mean.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited.
Yeah,
We are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Mike.
I'm Evan.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.